Welcome back to the channel. This is going to be a series of videos that are going to explain a little bit of the lore and what is behind the history of Shadow Empire. Everything that I'm going to read here is on the manual. You can find the manual on your documents when you purchase the game, and eventually I'm going to go by chapters. This is going to cover the first part of the situation that have led to the civilization into space and planet colonization, and eventually what happened before the catastrophe that is presented to us when we begin the actual game. So welcome to the channel. This is Victus. Let's begin the lore of Shadow Empire. So we start our history on planet Earth in the time of the 21st century. Chapter 1. The End of Us. In the late 20th century and early 21st century, societies on Earth start changing. Not suddenly, but gradually. An older generation was slowly fading away and younger generations took over. The essence of what made the once fully free and democratic societies great seemed to have slipped between the fingers of their citizens. Slowly but surely, the once democratic parties started to become more oligarchic in nature and more intertwined with businesses and big media. Equality before the law became something for the rich. Enterprise became impossible if you were small. Freedom of speech remained for quite some time, but only because the voices not worth listening to could easily be marginalized. It was a new age of the super rich. The remaining middle was partly co-opted in the elite class, while its majority sunk into the ever-increasing underclass. Governments started decreasing their level of activity due to the combination of mass unemployment, decreasing revenues, and ever-rising welfare costs. The loss of equality and freedom was so gradual that the new generations just did not really notice what was happening, since the process was already in motion when they were in their formative years. Ideology and solidarity had become dirty words, and it was probably the slow erosion of virtue that really opened the gates for the unscrupulous. Halfway through the 21st century, the life of the average Earth citizen had become very tough. Work was scarce, government benefits had dropped to below subsistence levels, and organized crime had made a resurgence with a vengeance. For the super rich, however, time had never been better. Powerful families had spider-like webs of power and interest stretching out over all important companies and governments. They had retreated to the countryside, where they had bought up huge areas which they protected by government privilege or private militias. They basically founded their own states within the old nation states, and the biggest among them housed hundreds of thousands of employees. Medical technology had moved away from developing medicine for the masses and now focused on individual gene-based therapies and age prolongation treatments for the ultra-rich. There was one big attempt at a revolt in the year 2063. At this time, in theory, the West was still a democracy. A charismatic young European by the name Karl Mainz managed to organize the oppressed and get independent media networks launched. He and his followers did everything right, and it seemed that a landslide election victory for his movement called equality could not be averted. This was the moment where the beast took off its mask. The elections were postponed due to security concerns. The independent media networks of the equality movement were simply put offline. Realizing what was happening, Karl Mainz went underground and denounced the crackdown as an insult against democracy. He tried to rally the masses into an armed revolution to take back what was theirs. The problem was most people, however, stayed at home. Tens of thousands did rally in Berlin, Paris, New York, and lots of other cities, and many did die or disappear without a trace. It is hard to say why Karl Mainz did not get more support in taking down the now openly tyrannical governments and their conglomerate puppet states. It seemed the great majority of the people just valued their own safety above a restoration of the freedom of the 20th century. Emboldened by their success in crushing the opposition and the absence of willpower among their sympathizers, there was now no stopping the powers that were. All pretense of rule of law was ended. National governments were stripped of most remaining power and basically become responsible for managing the great ghettos of Earth. The different national military forces either ceased to exist or came under the direct command of the different commercial industrial families and oligarchies. It was the birth of the 1,000 Years of Peace. Chapter 2: The 1,000 Years of Peace. During the following centuries, the New World Order proved itself incredibly stable. The poor struggled, worked and died in the now sprawling ghettos, and the oligarchs and their cadres enjoy an era of great technological growth and ecological recovery. Power arrangements between the most powerful used to have been a shady and secretive affair in the 21st century, but in the 22nd century the shame and fear of public outrage had turned into a burning pride, and it was in the year 2126 that the Earth Directorate Board was formed, the EDB. During the remainder of the 22nd century, all the rivaling families and oligarchies were brought into a new order resembling a grand feudal system. In the beginning, the board functioned like a primus inter pares, a first among equals, but as time went by, it got more and more powerful. It was eventually in the late 23rd century that the rule of law was officially introduced. Its main law was that every territory on the planet was given in administration to a specific corporation, oligarchy, or family. The most powerful families manned the board with directors, and the less powerful schemed to improve their position and get their family on the board as well. In the meantime, the living conditions of the common people had improved a lot. Increased centralization and the creation of new territorial power bases for the corporate families had decreased military and economic conflict and increased stability and living standards. By this time, the 20th century was a long-lost memory, only kept alive by a few fringe philosophers. Nobody cared anymore about the abstract concepts of freedom and equality. These words were as alien to the people of the 23rd century as medieval meanings as honor and chivalry were alien to the people of the 20th century. The metamorphosis of the societies of Earth was complete. One rose up in the ranks by obedience, capability, and perhaps luck. And even if you had all the three, it still took many generations to move from the bottom to the top. Patience, endurance, and acceptance had become the new virtues of the masses. Technological advances slowed down until the tech levels got to a point of almost absolute stasis in the 25th century. People born in these centuries could see the 100 years of their lives pass by without nothing that changes. No changes in culture, society, or technology. It was normal for post-25th century historians and philosophers to claim that the rule of law was eternal and nothing would ever change again. Of course, their philosophers were wrong. The system was remarkably stable, but as we all know, given enough time, everything will change. Mountains will erode and suns will eventually burn through their last drop of hydrogen. The change started around the beginning of the 4th millennium. New generations of oligarchs had begun the rebellion against their parents by preferring science positions above management positions. They grouped in competitive societies and were once again spurring on research and making many new discoveries. Their new culture of science obsession gradually became mainstream. Persuasion to adopt the new scientific culture was much aided by the profits some of these new scientifically successful families were now generating.